Good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm Professor Maggie Cusack, President of Munster Technological University. I'm afraid I can't be with you at today's event as I need to attend conferrings nearby, but I did want to record a few words by way of welcome. A special welcome, first of all, to our three visiting speakers, Professor Frank Rennie and Professor Keith Smyth from the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland, and to Grainne O'Keeffe, CEO of the Ludgate Digital Hub in West Cork. Welcome to our Bishopstown campus, and thank you for coming along today to give us the benefit of your insights and knowledge on the topics of digital and regional connectedness and growth. Welcome also to visitors from other universities, institutes and organisations joining us today. I would like to add a particular welcome to those joining online. We very much feel of the day's proceedings. The Department of Technology Enhanced Learning are very much trying to practice what they preach by demonstrating how we might, as a university, meet the expectation that many people now have of being able to join events like this, either in person or online, without crucially losing any sense of presence or engagement. So, welcome, and I hope your experience today is a very positive and engaging one. Many thanks to Shane Cronin and Brendan Flaherty for their work in this regard. The ways in which digital connections can support interaction and collaboration across a region and beyond is, of course, a big focus of today's event. Digital connections provide us with new ways to work, to live, and to learn. Recent experience of remote teaching and remote working have really highlighted for us how technology can be such a positive force to maintain contact, connection, and community during times of crisis. Technology can also be a way to support regional growth and create regional opportunity, and to address issues of equity, equality, and access, all of which is very universities. I know our three speakers have been leading the way on such matters through their work, and I look forward to hearing more about their practice and insights. I look forward also to hearing about the kind of conversation and discussion taking place today, something I hope we can continue to share in with all you attending today on and online. Many one involved in organising this event, and to all of you who have taken time out to attend and contribute. The best of luck for the day.
So thanks to Maggie Cusack for that, and Maggie joined myself and the speakers and Tom for lunch, and again indicated how she would like to have joined us. So let me say how the day is going to proceed. It's basically broken into two unequal halves, if you like. So in a moment, we're going to hear from our three speakers who will be introduced by Tom. But you'll have heard our president indicating there how we're very keen to engage our online audience in particular. So one of the ways in which we're doing this is we're using an audience response platform called Slido.com that you may have heard of. Even if you haven't, it's pretty straightforward to use. So the instruction is go to Slido.com and then enter the code GROWDX, so grow digital transformation, and it's not case sensitive. And when you go in there, there's two things that are being asked of you. So the first thing is to submit any questions that you would like the speakers to respond to during the discussion in the second half of the day. But there's also a poll there, okay? So something like a series of multiple choice questions, if you like, relating, as you can see there on the screen, relating to various different themes associated with the conference. So that's another way of input to the conversation and to the panel discussion, and interesting as well, I suppose, to see who is on a few of these things. Okay, so that's nearly it for me now, except to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Tom Farrelly, from our Kerry campus. So Tom is going to introduce our 3 speakers, and he tells me he's going to time manage them.
That's the main thing there.
So watch out, okay? Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Gearoid. Anybody who knows me in the EdTech world, I'm sort of famous or infamous for the Gusta, the 5 minutes, and so I will be bringing the same level of timekeeping. It's great we have like some very esteemed academic visitors here, which holds absolutely no water with me. I'll treat everybody with the exact same. But no, well, I didn't want to say good. But as I said, the idea is to get engagement and to get certainly some information and thoughts from our speakers, and then to get a feedback so we can have that discussion. Our first speaker is from an institution which I've long had admiration for, the University of Highlands and Islands. And I think particularly as we move into an era with a technological university, as I often said, stretching from Youghal to Ballyferriter, which represents a certain amount of challenges and opportunities. So someone coming from an institution like the University of Highlands and Islands, I think we've a lot to learn. So it's with great pleasure I want to introduce Keith Smyth, Head of Digital Teaching and Learning for the University of Highlands and Islands.
Thanks very much indeed, Gearoid, Tom, colleagues, for the opportunity to be here. I think to get things underway, we agreed that we'd share a little bit about the kind of background and development of UHI as a geographically and digitally distributed university, explore some of the things we're doing around the digital and connectivity and engagement, and some of our directions going forward, and hopefully that will set the scene for some of what we might discuss today. So to give you a little bit of a context, UHI is a federated and tertiary university. We're made up of 12 academic partners across the Highlands and Islands region of Scotland. A region in terms of landmass is about the size of Belgium, so a fairly big campus if you like. And in relation to our tertiaryness, we cover both FE and HE. So we're talking over lunch about the, one of the nice things about UHI is that you could potentially come in as a learner to do an entry-level vocational qualification and go all the way through to a PhD, which has certainly happened, and we've certainly had lots of students that have come in to do entry-level vocational qualifications and go all the way through to masters. So that tertiaryness and bridging the kind of transition from school to FE to HE and into employment is something that's really close to our heart as a university and the way in which we try and approach things. In addition to having our 12 academic partners, and you get a sense of the kind of spread on the map there, we have around about 70 regional kind of study centres, learning centres. These allow access to education for learners across the region, but they're particularly important for those in some of the more rural regions and rural areas who otherwise may not be able to travel to access further higher education. We have, it's kind of quite hard to determine, but we have around about 37,000 students with a split between about 2/3 FE and about 1/3 HE. However, many of our HE students, FE students, are effectively HE. They'll be doing an HNC or an HND to transition into a degree programme. And as a university, we're very accommodating in terms of what we expect from our students to come into the university. And there's several reasons for that, including economic reasons within the region. And again, something we're talking about over lunch. We don't expect students to be able to evidence that they can excel at studying at higher education, just that they can meet the threshold for studying at higher education. And I may say a bit more about that. We do a range of courses and curricula, many of which you would find in most universities, but given the nature of UHI and its kind of part of its purpose around the kind of economic and social well-being of the region, we also do many kind of courses and curricula that are tied into the culture, the language, the geography, and the economy of the region. So, for example, if you're going to study marine science, you would go to Oban, where we have the Scottish Association for Marine Science. That's a kind of key location where you'd go. If you wanted to study adventure geography, those types of kind of pursuits, then you go to Fort William, UHI West Highland. So a lot of the kind of lot of the curriculum's tied to what we do and who we are, but not to the exclusion of covering other things, but to the kind of benefit of having curricula that relate to who we are and the region and the culture that will bring people in, but also help our own students develop skills, attributes, knowledge that will benefit the region should they decide to stay in the region. And one of the big kind of parts of the ethos of founding UHI back in the 90s was to provide a dedication institution where there wasn't one. We've got some universities that have got satellite campuses, but none that had a dedicated presence within the region as a whole. I've said a little bit about the ethos of UHI and why we're created. Maybe just to expand upon that. A big part of the mission of UHI has been to bring access to particularly higher education within a region where there wasn't a dedicated university presence. Some of that's been tied into meeting local kind of economic needs, but also kind of cultural needs within the area. We've sought to bridge gaps between FE and HE, as well as bridge those gaps between distance in terms of being able to access education. We've also sought opportunities, and I might say a little bit more about that, but in terms of creating opportunities, we've very much tried to look at what the university means within and off and beyond the region. We're in a kind of, what we're calling a kind of third stage of the development of UHI at the moment. We've got a new, some core values and some commitments around tertiary education and what tertiary education look like in a post-school context. For those that want to transition from FE into HE and possibly onto postgraduate HE. We're also looking at the types of research we have an impact within and beyond the region, tied to the nature of the region and their geographic and digital dispersity. Engagement are important, and as we've also got commitments to things like equality and inclusion, Scots Gaelic in terms of language and culture, and also climate change, and there's some of the key drivers at the moment. I want to say something about how that's changing and reaching, and we can't ignore the events of the last couple of years and what that's meant in relation to digital engagement and connectivity and the challenges, but also the opportunities that the pandemic has provided us with. Although we are a university that's networked, many of our degrees can be undertaken from anywhere within UHI, regardless of where the degree is actually being delivered from. So for example, most of our undergraduate engineering is taught out of Perth UHI, but if I was an undergraduate engineering student or someone seeking to study undergraduate engineering from Orkney, I would go into the local campus, UHI Orkney. I would access, prior to the pandemic, lectures and seminars by video conference, and also engage with peers on the institutional VLE and have some local tutorial support within Orkney College. The whole point being that you can access the degree without having to leave your own area. So we did a lot of network delivery. Prior to the pandemic, we were the biggest user in higher education of video conference technology in Europe. It was embedded in pretty much all our teaching spaces and all our campuses and all the 70 regional study centres. The means by which we do network delivery has changed as we kind of move out of the pandemic, but that kind of mode of engagement is still really important. However, although we did lots of network delivery, very few of our staff and very few of our students self-selected to study fully online, as was required when the pandemic hit. So we're currently at a stage where we're thinking about what does digital engagement and what does digital connectivity mean within and beyond our university and in the communities we serve as we move slowly out of the pandemic situation. Kind of normality lies ahead. University, we're made up of 12 academic partners and a central university office. All part of the university partners are independent and employ their own staff. It can be challenging to have an agreed way forward, and we enhance it. Over the last few years, we've been working with the learning and teaching enhancement strategy. It's values-based. It's based on trying to provide knowledge, where we talk about, develop and sharing across the UHI partnership. We're working on a next iteration of that, very much informed by the experience of COVID and what that means for digital and education and connectivity going forward. So the strategy we're about to move towards over the next few weeks is being co-created. It's been co-created through discussions with staff across the partnership around what they would like to see in terms of teaching experience at UHI, what we've learned, the things we'd like to keep, the opportunities we don't want to lose by going back to how things were before, and the opportunities we don't want to lose for learners who suddenly found that subjects we're told couldn't really be taught online, even marginally, could then be more accessible. So in terms of developing new strategy, again, we are looking at something that's values-based, that articulates enabling practices for how we take learning and teaching forward. And in terms of the values, you can just get a flavour of those a bit more detail on the screen here. So these values are things that we've co-created with and which we're saying should be the hallmarks of a learning and teaching experience in the UHI COVID. These are cornerstones. We're saying these values should be experienced by all greater or lesser extent, regardless of whether they're FE, HE, studying something quite vocational, regardless of who they're studying with, and regardless of their own modes of engagement. And I won't go into these, but this gives a flavour of the types of committing to in relation to the student experience. In relation to digital and connectivity, we've got commitments to communities, not just their own communities, but using digital to enable others to join those professional communities or vocational communities that they will join and become part of as they progress through the studies and qualify and go out into industry or whatever profession they're preparing for. We're also very much interested in how we enrich learning through digital practices. We're moving away from talking about technology and learning and teaching to digitally enabled practices and digitally enabled education and what that might look like in various kind of guises. Open is also something that's become increasingly important to us. We're talking over lunch about various initiatives UHI has had around creating low-cost or open e-textbook resources for students. And within this context, we're very much thinking of what digital can offer, particularly it's ramped up over the last couple of years, to make knowledge freely available and knowledge artifacts freely available, not just to our students, but to the wider communities. And not just those that would formally engage in further higher education, but that could benefit from any knowledge that the university is creating, which can share digitally. There are a couple of key concepts that we're thinking about in relation to this, particularly as we kind of move beyond pandemic, and that's around what does the core or dislocated campus look like? What does the dislocated campus look like when it might be with you, wherever you might be? What does that mean for the intersection of physical space into the core or dislocated curriculum? The stage we're at the moment, very much looking towards taking an evidence-based approach to some of this and thinking about some of the key values that might drive some of what we might do with digital going forward. This visual we're looking at the moment is part of a continuation of a piece of research that have been undertaken with us, but which is kind of shaping some of our thinking at UHI and the kind of concept of the digitally distributed curriculum and what that might in relation to how it's co-produced, our students, our tutors, and those in the communities that we serve, what it might mean in terms of co-location. So thinking really carefully about not just our own institutional technologies, but those digital tools and technologies that our students bring with us and how they can enable more collaboration and more sharing of knowledge and more open forms of learning. I think we need to be particularly cognizant of in this context as we think the digital post the pandemic, how limiting some of our institutional technologies for our students are. Not that they don't do good things, but if you take the virtual, that's based on an information architecture. Your students' matriculation code linked to module codes and linked to program codes, which design in and also design out who they get access to, who they get to work with, what resources they get to access. And when we moved into lockdown, I think most universities found their staff could easily self-organize really quite quickly, do things like Zoom and MS Teams and other technologies. The main technology for students within the institution, the VLE, designed out any opportunity for them to self-organize or cluster because they were already clustered into specific module groups or program groups. So students started to cluster in their own spaces, but some students were left behind. So there's something we've got to think really carefully about going forward about digital resilience and robustness of our spaces, where the physical and digital intersect, and where our students have autonomy within the spaces and technologies that we provide them with. So these are some of the things we're toying with at the moment. And one thing that we think is particularly important, regardless of our own institutional contexts, how do we harness the digital and the way in which digital has become more prevalent in our universities to share the outputs of the work that our students do and to share the scholarly and research university. We've seen much, just on the kind of student front, we've seen more and more digital forms of assessment. I think we'd all accept that students progress through the studies, particularly getting towards the higher end. They're producing knowledge that potentially has value to wider aspects of society, a small business down the street, a third sector startup. What do we do with that digital knowledge currently that our students produce, and which is by and large their own intellectual property? It's in the VLE, it's in Turnitin. It could be something that we harness much more widely going forward if we can adopt notions not just of open practice, but of things like students as digital scholars. Digital scholarship, digital forms of research and knowledge exchange are, but should not just be the preserve of academics, particularly when we look at some of the value and the potential value of some of the work our students create. So we're very much looking at this whole space in relation to what needs to change, how can it be more robust going forward, and how can we use the digital to wider benefit society and individuals and groups in society in relation to the knowledge that universities create, and not just for those that might benefit from taking part in a formal education, but those that might benefit just from knowledge being more publicly available, public pedagogy, but digitally supported. So that's the direction we're kind of moving in, and happy to explore any of those issues, in the kind of panel discussion later on. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you might get a sense of why I have so much admiration for UHI. So don't forget to slido.com, and if you're on Twitter, hashtag GrowDX. Watching the time and moving swiftly on, so we're moving from the academic to a organisation based out here in West Cork. So how do we actually make that sort of connection, I suppose, between and within a region and between the universities? And I think Grainne O'Keeffe, who's the CEO of Ludgate Hub, might give us some insight of one possible model. Grainne.
Hi everybody. Well, what's interesting about today for me is this is my first physical public speaking engagement since I joined Ludgate, which was in July of 2020. Everything since then has basically been a virtual or a Zoom event, so to be here, so thank you for that invitation. A little look back in time, just in relation to my own journey. Gearoid and myself were actually in school together in Skibbereen and in 1990. Back then, the kids of Skibbereen, the journey that was trajectory for the university going or the college going kids was to leave, go off to college, and more than likely to return again, right? So I left at 17, and for another few years, I wasn't ready to leave academia before I hit the brave, bold world of the working life, and ended up going international straight away. So that really, the fact that I'm actually back here now in Skibbereen, X number of years later, nobody expected that, right? And that has really come about as a function of connectivity and the opportunities that it brings to Ireland. I have a lot of passion for that. I know there's people in this room here who probably would share that, and you'll hopefully hear some of that passion when I share the journey of Ludgate. So essentially, Ludgate's vision is to be a world leader in rural regeneration through digital transformation. So it's a pretty lofty vision. We believe over the last 5 or 6 years we've been able to can be done for a rural depopulated area. Similar to what you said there, Keith, we are in a state of transition post-COVID, so we're not at all. It's not a static space, it's a space, and certainly we want to evolve and move forward and progress as the digital opportunities emerge. And we make some of those opportunities happen as well. So our vision essentially is to enable sustainable knowledge jobs in the region, and this particular region is West Cork, but our model is not unique to West Cork anymore, it is a template, by building digital capacity and capability, facilitating innovation and learning, and embedding Ludgate and the Ludgate movement as a crucial asset within the local community. So we don't want to be an exclusive asset, we want to be an inclusive asset. I think when Ludgate first opened up, people were a little suspicious of it. It's like, are they going to be all the techie the techies, you know, with the fancy tashes and, you know, whatever brew beers were going on. And I think we need to continue to dispel that myth as we bring the community, the external community, closer to the Ludgate community. We started off 5 or 6 years ago with the goal of articulating in terms of a KPI of job enablement, you know, so to enable 500 knowledge jobs in the region. I've since extended that goal to be a little not as hard as a fast, you know, 5 job KPI, but to increase GDP of the region. And I actually can't wait for the latest census data to be out. It was a great snapshot of from the last time the census got taken in 2016 to now, actually has in reality benefited from transformation. So a little timeline. I don't know if you make the slides available later, but there's a lovely play that now. I call it the tearjerker video. It's basically how members of our board of directors got together, brainstormed. They had the vision, a lot of philanthropy in the early days. There was a lot of bringing together of the right people, and you'll see our board are in a moment, and that really, I think, a difference in the early years. And so it started just being an idea and getting the right people in a room and realizing that digital connect changed the landscape, but we just need to embed that digital connectivity region. Luckily, Anne O'Leary out in West Cork, and we were able to cables turned on. Nice, you know, which we were I think we were the first rural to gigabit back in 2015. The building, which was previously a bakery, was donated by a local businessman, John Field. Prior to it being a bakery, it was a cinema. I had my first cinematic experience in there. It was probably, I can't remember what it was, but anyway. So it was a cinema, and then it was a bakery, and then it was lying vacant and in disrepair, unused. And with a lot more than a lick of paint, a nice architect, a lot of vision. It essentially it's like a townhouse, and it's a 10,000 square foot place that it's hot desking, it's incubation, it's digital skills for the elderly, it's Coder Dojo. During lockdown, some of the kids from the school who couldn't get into school because the schools were closed, and one of the Leaving Cert kids had to come in and do his online learning from Ludgate. We had a professor from UCC who was teaching maths from Ludgate during lockdown. So it really is a multi-purpose building, and it's not just about the jobs. It's really about what does the community need. We don't need to pivot. We are elastic. We can be flexible. When the building was refurbished and we were able to demonstrate there was demand for this product offering, we were able to demonstrate this to, you know, government agencies. Enterprise Ireland then collaborated with us and made us aware of the REDF development program. And they have been extremely supportive to us through the years, because what that allows us to do is, many of you guys will know, it's not just the physical space that's important. Obviously, that's the foundation, and that is a critical asset, but it's the programs that you offer, it's the people that you have on site that make it an enticing and engaging environment for ideation, for networking. We've talked about the students, what are their needs, and in a similar way, Ludgate needs to have that community of staff with a wide breadth of skill sets to accommodate the needs of the community. So on the back of the Enterprise Ireland REDF programme, we were able to fund 4 positions that can run programmes for startup and entrepreneurship, an education programme where we partner with the local schools, we help them with their digital transformation. There's obviously a huge amount of agricultural activity happening in the region. We want to tap into potential innovation that can emerge from there, so partnering with local businesses there. So a lot of incubation and a lot of ideas happening, and a lot of collaboration with the local stakeholders in the community. We got that fund in 2019. Well, 2019, very quickly, 6 months later, it was COVID, right? So what was kind of beautiful, maybe, is the programs we were all able to deliver them virtually. So they did not stall in their progression. We just needed to adapt and learn how to do things virtually. I'm looking at Pat Culhane. Pat helped us with our series. We'd never done it before. Pat helped us do that, and it was a beautiful collaboration. And so that's how we tend to do things. We DIY, right? We find the subject matter expertise in the community. We're a social enterprise, so we're operating on a shoestring budget. We have partnered, as I mentioned, with Pat and other various people around. We partnered with the Marketings to You, who they wanted to get job experience with local businesses. So we basically were like a Tinder matching solution. We matched them with local micro businesses who had no digital marketing experience, but they had a need. We matched them with the marketing students, and the students got their job experience that they can now put on their CV when they're going out looking for work. Beautiful. So yeah, we were able to continue our programs through COVID despite the challenges with that in the early days. And as I say, now the challenge is nearly going back to physical, and how do we do that? On the back of our work, we featured in the 2019 programme for government where they recognised what we were doing for the region and said, could this be a template for other areas to replicate? And many of you guys will be familiar with Minister Humphrey's rural policy, where she's keen to have hubs available in many regions. And that's, there's hubs out there. I think what's important is that the hubs have an offering that cater to the unique requirements of the region, and it's not just a physical asset. Depending on the degree of digital connectivity in the region, the physical space could become redundant over time, and then that's where the programs play a key role subsequently. So that we're slightly ahead of the curve of some of the other rural hubs, so we're able to teach as we go along and make the mistakes ahead of everybody else, So where are we now in 2022? Well, we're getting back to the physical space, but what we have observed is there's a tapering of demand, actually, now that the fibre optic connectivity in West Cork is actually very strong. So we need to make sure that we can offer additional services like the programs. And so just a couple of KPIs here that have demonstrated the work and the contribution to the local region. We feel we have enabled over 360 direct and indirect jobs. The building itself can house up to 75 people at any one moment in time, but we also sell hot desks in the summer so people can come and work locally. What we found during lockdown, especially when the schools were closed, people who were originally from Skib but who are now up in Dublin or wherever, and their family or their parents were still back at home, they'd stayed. If the kids had no school requirements, they'd operate out of the Ludgate. The parents would operate out of the Ludgate, and they might stay for a month or 2 months. And so that extra money was now being spent in the locale. So that's the kind of the indirect consequences of having such a facility. So yeah, close to the 4,000 mark now on the hot desks, and it's summer season is quite busy for us. The other hubs in Dublin and Cork, who are part of our network, they're empty. We're busy, which is great because it's nice to get new faces, and the seasonal visitors tend to be the ones that come back every time. So we believe the hub has contributed to the gigabyte economy, and so Spearline is one of the local success stories. It's in the telco space. Spearline started off as a 2-person company. It's now got over 150 people working for them, of which 120 are based in Skibbereen. Prior to 2015, prior to the fibre optic connectivity in the region, I think the team was at around 25. So they have been able to grow from a team of 25 people to, they were 100% based in the town. They are now a global company. They have a team in India, they have a team in Romania, they have a team in Israel. They acquired a business recently in Israel, and they are now standing at close to 150, and I believe there could be some job announcements coming later on in the year as well. So we love to use the Spearline story as a role model for what can be done out of rural Ireland. We have the West Cork Distillers. That's more of a manufacturing, but certainly their digital marketing is reliant on digital connectivity. O'Donnell Furniture, I don't know if you guys saw on the news recently, they're pivoting slightly. They were, prior to COVID, or prior to the pandemic, or prior to the connectivity, I beg your pardon, they design fit-outs for cruise liners and hotels. And before they had fibre, they were downloading massive files at a seriously snail's pace. And when fibre was being rolled out in the town, they're just outside the periphery of the town. They're on the way down to Baltimore. And they weren't going to get it. So it's that last mile, right? And they were going, hang on a second, if I don't get this connectivity, I'm screwed, I can't grow anymore. So Ludgate helped to advocate for them to get that fibre optic. So they were able to completely amplify their business on the back of that. But now what we're finding is they're pivoting again, And what we're finding in our region is the creative talent in West Cork is extraordinary, and we're seeing that in Ludgate. So over 30% of our members come from creative sector, whether that is, you know, the movie maker to the graphic designer to the product designer. And so O'Donnell Furniture would share some of that creative talent, and a lot of businesses are family run, so some of the family talent is in the artistic side of things as well. They were working on the Graham Norton Holdings film last year, and I suppose other movies started getting made in West Cork, and now they're pivoting the excess building space. They're now moving into the film space, content creation. We know content creation has exploded. So I suppose it just shows the agility by tapping into the local talent, the agility that digital connectivity can bring to the region, and how economic empowerment can subsequently follow from that. So just very quickly there are a snapshot of the physical asset space. So we've got hot desking, we've got full-time members, part-time members, conference facilities, and then private office space. We offer the programs that I mentioned, supporting entrepreneurship and startups, digital skills, Hub Academy 101, I was telling the lads about that earlier. The Department of Rural Affairs kind of commissioned us to run workshops teaching some of the other rural areas how to start and run a digital hub. So yeah, as mentioned, we're on a shoestring budget, so any little bit of paid work is helpful over and beyond our hot desking and our membership. Our pricing is priced to the local market, so we're, as I mentioned, we want to make sure we're not exclusive, we're inclusive. Over the next 12 months now, we're going to focus a lot more on those programs, focusing on the startup initiatives, the digital marketing requirements in the region, collaborating, as I mentioned, on the agri side of things, focusing on what clusters are there, and continuing our education model. I'm being urged on here, but we do partner with others as well nationally. We don't want to be an island. We feel we can only achieve maximum success through collaboration with our partners. Grow Remote, I don't know if many of you guys would have heard of Grow Remote. I'm really excited about that, especially for the rural areas. Grow Remote essentially also funded by Enterprise Ireland, actually, social enterprise. But what they do is they identify all the corporates that are at any employer that can offer remote jobs. They curate the jobs, and then they basically make them available on their website. So we've amalgamated that into our website, so we can amplify those opportunities for the folks of West Cork. And it means I can get a job with a US multinational if I want, but I don't have to leave. I can do that from Skibbereen. So I think there's huge potential there for all remote areas. That's not just an Irish thing, by the way. That is also something that you guys in Scotland would be able to benefit from. Irish Tech Hub Network, we're the hubs that, like Dogpatch in Dublin, Portershed in Galway, RDI in Killorglin, Republic of Work, and Ormore Baths in Belfast, because we're an all-island initiative. And that's supporting the tech businesses, the tech-dependent businesses, and let's find the next unicorn. Connected Hubs, that's coming from the Department of Rural Affairs, and then there's the corporate side, the channel partners. They're the guys that pitch basically to the multinationals, saying, if you want to access talent remotely, collaborate with the hubs, and we'll find your talent locally. At your leisure, we can look at these. Education is really important to us as well, and we've been doing a lot of individual programs with the school for all the levels, whether it's primary, secondary, and then lifelong learning as well. Virtual events, as I said, we had the L plates on originally. Now we got the N plates. I don't know if we have the license yet, but basically we have a massive lineup of virtual events on a regular basis. Demand for that has tapered a little bit, so we'll just see how that goes in the future. But we're always looking at our stats on that. And it's all about knowledge sharing and bringing that knowledge to our region. We were very fortunate in 2018 to have Michael D. Higgins come and visit us. And, he gave us his blessing, which is always wonderful to see that. And, look, we're never static. We're always dynamic. Very interested to hear from other areas what they're doing so we can learn from them. We want to continue pushing the boundaries for our region and ultimately for remote and rural Ireland. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And apologies for sort of pushing you along there. No, but you said something which over and over again. I think the issue of connectivity, I mean, we can talk till we're blue in the face, but I do think you can have all the best of intentions, but if the connectivity isn't there. But I do think the idea of hubs, it's one thing, apart from the campuses that UHI has, it has the learning centres as well, which I think is that strength, and it enables, particularly when you're serving a large geographical presence, enables the university, by partnering up with hubs or remote centres, whatever, because God knows there's enough empty buildings around these rural areas. Last but certainly not least, this man here is, well, yeah, you'll enjoy this. It's Professor Frank Rennie. He's a Professor of Sustainable Development for 8 more days, Frank, is that correct? I'm genuinely really pleased to welcome him then. Thanks very much, Frank Rennie.
Fesken mij nu, fesken mij harden, en met tolken me call route nu, and la more on a Ballymoor Cork. I'm pleased to meet you here. This meeting's been postponed for a while, so it's good to be here at last. I'm going to try to do something just now that I tell my students not to do, and it's to do you 56 slides in 15 minutes. But you don't have to take notes or even look at them, because I'll put them all up in SlideShare afterwards, and we can look at these as a sort of resource. It's a way of actually skimming through these things. This is not about predicting the future. What I tell people is that predicting the future, the one thing you can be certain about is you'll get it wrong. So this is about actually taking you through the whole process of what it's like, if we can get the clicker to work. No? There we go. So we're looking at different pedagogic styles here, and we're looking at distributed learning, distributed geographically, distributed different technologies. It's going to change. It goes by various names: blended learning, hybrid learning now. In the centre of that, openness, open education, getting access to the information that you can use to progress yourself personally in your businesses and your career. It's going from things like Mode 1 education, which was really solitary and traditional, into more team-based things, networking things, mission-led things, and taking things through that are contextually defined, looking at the context rather than just the content. What are the drivers for this? It's about convenience for you and I. It's about doing things from our home. The students that are now in their pyjamas studying, whatnot, good on you, that's part of the thing there. It's also about intellectual stimulation. I began this thing as sustainable development, rural development professor, because I'm interested in getting people, the information to people, not dragging them out of rural areas into the cities to learn and then go back again. Because by the time they've come out, they're dislocated and they can't go back. They're leaving their families behind. And we're looking at 110 islands within Scotland. I don't want people to move from the islands. I want the people to enjoy them and have that richness of community in the place. We did a thing a number of years ago called the Connectedness. There was a thing called a single computer that you linked into in the early 70s and whatnot. Then it all began to become joined up, and then it began to be internet connected, and it goes through there. And the internet is not just about people, it's about the connections you make between people that goes on and on and on. And that leads to the sort of things like we call the Web 2. Web 2 is about not just being a passive receptor of these things, but about interacting with these things, creating content as well. Your podcasts, for example, you can listen to these things, you can create your own response to these things, and then you can put it back in the public domain and add to that. You can build on these things. It's what I call hyper-interactivity. It's about the fact that I can literally put something on Twitter, for example, and get a response from Australia within 5 minutes. And then somebody else in Canada sees that and comments on that. And somebody else comes back from Cork and says, no, you're wrong. That's about something else. And that happens in real time. Hyper-interactivity. It's not just about the interactivity that you and I have. It's about the whole thing has been speeded up and you have multiple access. I literally asked a question a few years ago about agricultural reforms in New Zealand. And when I came back to my desk the next morning, I had a response and the email that said, a farmer in New Zealand had seen what I asked and passed it to me. I'm the civil servant who wrote the legislation. What do you want to know? Yeah? So it's about networking. It's about making these things. It's about enabling our students to learn from each other and to learn from other people. It's not just about learning from me as a subject expert. It's about what you can learn from each other. Many of the students in our master's programs could be teaching on these programs because they have very specialist skills that they want to build on and expand. So the student who's out of that network is the one that's missing. So we want to facilitate that hyper-interactivity as much as we can. So it's about not just about looking to how we link into these things, into that things coming to me, whether it's going to be data, whether it's going to be images, whether it's going to be able to read journals and what at a distance. It's about me able to put that back into the system. So the minute you begin to facilitate that on a hyper-interactivity level, all that's left is give me my certificate. You don't actually have to come here and be taught because you actually know enough about this to learn from this. It's about me providing the validation of that to say, yes, this is a first-class degree, this is a PhD, etc., etc. It's a paradigm shift. We often talk about paradigm shifts. Actually, they are huge. And this is about learning not just from the massed institutions of learning centres, my daughter learning in the back garden. We've moved from face-to-face through a more open system for learning to online using technology. And now we're looking into self-study and self-motivation, what we call pedagogy. Pedagogy is about strictly teaching with children. Andragogy is about adults, and pedagogy is about self-directed learning for the individual. It's not about transmissive lectures anymore. It's about me recording these things and making them available to you to watch whenever you want. I record the instantaneous knowledge transfer stuff, and then we pass it on. It brings in peer response, so we can actually link these things into other people, so other people can act. We can bring them in with small tutorials to do problem-solving questions. You watch the video, you learn from the thing there, and then you sit down with an interactive, and you can ask very specific questions and get specific answers to your users. Here's me delivering a talk in Italy last year. I say that the last 12 months I've been in 16 different countries. I've never left my own chair in the house. Because of the pandemic, you're not able to travel, but nevertheless, we're still able to take part in these things at a distance. That was a conference of dentists in Tuscany. You missed Tuscany, but there we were. You know, I live in a beautiful place anyway. It's about not just the communities of education, as Keith was saying, about it's communities of inquiry that we have. It's about not just providing that link to the educational content, but it's about to the learners and to the ways that you can learn. Learning how to learn. And within the UHI a number of years ago, we developed a system that goes from solely face-to-face courses to solely online courses, a 7-stage program. This is not inevitable continuation. You could be at any point on this scale. And it's about how you mix the face-to-face and the online technology for the best effect. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's about knowledge spreading through the system and building on each other. You know, Newton's phrase about we are what we are because we build on the shoulders of giants, we're still doing that. Increasingly, this is the digitized establishment. So we've moved from a university library being something as grand as this to being an online library. I sit at my desk and access thousands and thousands of journals with 2-3 clicks. To me, that is invaluable. I don't even have to go as far as the nearest town to access that anymore. It's through the managed learning environment. I don't like the term virtual. It's not a virtual environment. We're not virtual students. They're real students. It's the managed learning environment that's a repository for all that knowledge. But we can mix that with practical sessions. We can mix that with things that have to be done face-to-face. For a number of years, I was a visiting professor in London with a dental school, not because I know anything about teeth, but because they realised the benefit of actually providing professional education to dentists without having to remove them from the surgery, without having to move away and do other things there. We can bring that up with things like field trips. Originally, I'm a geologist. That's an integral part of learning to do your science. But we can do that with remote field trips as well. There's no pleasure in going out on a wet day to look at a field or look at wet rocks when it's pissing down rain, it's down your back, it's coming out your legs, it's uncomfortable. You can do that in a visible environment and then look at these things much later in a more relaxed institution. Third places have become really important. So the first place, the home, the second place is school or the university. The third place is any other place where students gather. We're looking at open educational resources that are now hugely spread, things that we use in our day-to-day, whether it's going to be YouTube or Academic Earth. Many of you will know things like TED Talks and so on. Some of these things you have to select in advance because for the quality and for the level you want, but these are sophisticated educational tools that you don't have to reinvent. There are hundreds of social networks. There's a whole issue with GDPR and what you link up there institutionally, but don't kid yourself, your students are not doing that already. Your students are already doing that behind your back. They're talking about you and they're talking about what's going on, even if you're not part of that conversation. So we have to use that to triangulate knowledge and bring that together in a way that people actually understand that it's more than one way of looking at problems. The importance of place, of fitting what you're learning to where people are. If you try to get people to do things there that they're not ready for, they're not level, they won't take that on board. So it's about providing a scaffolding that people can learn and grow at their own time and their own pace in a structured way that's systematic and robust and defendable. The attention economy is where it's coming from. Attention is, so we're beyond the information age. Information, and the more information we have, like everything other commodity, it becomes less valuable because there's everywhere we're awash with information. What we're missing is the ability for that to grab our attention. So it's us flagging up the things that are important, the ways that are important, the ways of thinking that are important in the online environment, to take people through that journey so that they can actually learn as they're going. Pay attention for the attention economy. It's going to become big in the future. Things like photograph sharing, Flickr, online Google Photographs, and so on and so forth. The power of the crowd. This is the only time that I dislike Ireland. This is at Murrayfield. And if we're looking at the crowd that's there, the ability for people there to fill in that and add things to them, and that information grows and shares, and you bring something that I don't know, and we add to the pile of these things, it is huge. At a professional level, that mentoring, that peer reinforcement can be done through blogs, it can be done through shared groups online, it can do through Teams or WebEx and various other things there. It provides opportunities for study in lots of different ways, whether it's by the phone, face-to-face, private interaction, library sessions. There's a whole range of things there that we can go and go through there. It facilitates the self-directed learning, hutagogy. Social spaces have become more and more important as we go through these things. It's about shared communities of interest. It's about getting away from this trial by exam. It's about moving to things like online assessments that are personalized, that are geared towards the problems that you deal with when you go to work, not some inflated exam that you do for an academic purpose. And the benefits for that it provides goes back to the enlightenment thing of education being for the public good. It helps to build curriculum facility, it helps to build flexible courses, it provides multidisciplinary stuff. It gets away from some of the ideas that things that you don't think about that are challenging. When people ask me about why do you do things online and how do you do it that way, you realize that you can do these things better in an online exam than you can do face-to-face. It's the same set of problems. You cannot do what you do face-to-face online the same way, but there are different ways to deliver that whole thing. It's not cheaper, it's a different cost structure, but actually it's highly scalable. It takes these things through. It actually means a wider currency and a faster currency for access. Almost always, people say, you can't do my subject online, and I say, you want to bet? What's the space? And we can do it very, very quickly. The challenges are, you're limited by the technology. It's a blessing, it's also a curse. If you live in a black spot, you have to find ways of recovering that. We're working at some of these things to put things offline. And it clicks with a system where you come back into the online. So working with gamekeepers, for example, who are in the field, but it can come back to a network community. When they do that, their device upgrades. Some of the things to watch, Keith's comment about self-organisation of groups. This is the big thing in terms of an open institutional environment. It's about how students can get together to learn. And the equivalent of the cafeteria is the coffee break, the bar, and so on and so forth. So we're all being subject to changes now. Digital resources offer a huge opportunity to link these things. I think in the same way as the 18th century, we went from the Scottish Enlightenment, which led the drive across Europe for radical thinking and for rational thinking, rather than just motivated by the belief that this is the way to do things. I think we're moving into a new Enlightenment that's based on digital open educational resources. It's about open access, it's about crowdsourcing, it's about validation and verification by the experts from different places, but they don't have to be in the same room as you. So that's 56 slides in 15 minutes. I have some questions that I want to put to you, but we'll put that into the panel session afterwards. And when I get home on the weekend, I will put these slides online so you can look at them at a more leisure pace. And feel free to agree or disagree as we go through. Thank you, Tom. There's a book that Keith and I did called Digital Education there, which I'll leave here if you want to have a browse on that afterwards as well, but it summarises some of these things.
It's like a chat show, the book. Well done. No, honestly, brilliant, brilliant. Listen, as I said, this is only one half of it, and hopefully people have been getting involved, and we'll be getting a discussion afterwards. So just very quickly, I'll just hand over to Gearoid. We'll just get some results from the survey so far. And well done again to our three speakers.
That's great. So as Tom says, thanks a million to our three speakers. So I think we might have some preliminary results of the poll there. Okay, so in what ways do you think the worlds of remote Working and remote learning could better support, converge, or complement each other. So there's a clear winner there in terms of a change in desired graduate skills to better facilitate hybrid working. There's an interesting one in hybrid learning coming after it. We'll come back to these after the break, but just to give people a bit of a preview, and they might inform some of the panel discussion as well. So what do you think are some of the shared drivers of change which both universities and workplaces need to respond to now? A desire for more flexible learning, more flexible working processes is a clear winner there, and increased digitization is in second place. And I think we had a third poll question. What lasting changes would you like to see in both universities and workplaces following the remote teaching and working period? So what is going to be the legacy, if you like, then of emergency remote teaching and working? Improved skill development to support working and or learning in an online or digital format is the clear winner there again. So interesting to see what the consensus view is between our in-person and online attendees. So we're going to take a break now. We'll come back to some of those results, but we will also be posing some of the questions that we've gathered from people to our panelists. So do please come back, but we're going to take a 10-minute break now out in the main foyer where there's tea and coffee being served. Online participants, I'm afraid you'll have to serve your own tea and coffee. Sorry about that. works. Thanks for coming back. Are we live again there, lads? Okay, great. All right. So as indicated, we're going to take a few questions. So we're going to start with, I think, 2 questions from Slido. And I'll do one, I'll ask one, and then Tom will ask one, and then we'll take questions from people who are here in the room, if that suits. So, let me just parse this one here now. Oh, yeah. So Frank will love this one, I think. A criticism often made against remote learning and working during the pandemic is the lack of social interaction and a lack of a sense of community, which is associated with studying or working by yourself. Is this something higher education or digital hubs can address? So higher education first maybe, and then Grainne maybe on digital hubs. Over to you.
So, is this on, yeah? So, absolutely. I had this discussion, argument with a colleague just about 2 weeks ago, and they were saying there's not as much social interaction during this because we're all working online and education online. And I said, you know what? That's because we haven't designed for that. We haven't even thought about that. The system was built for education, delivering education, without thinking about how we deliver things socially. Just because your kids use Facebook and use Instagram and whatnot for fun and games doesn't mean to say they can use that for educational purposes. And the very fact that it exists and the very fact that it's used means that we haven't, as institutions, thought about how you do that. Keith's point about the facilitation, about them not being able to self-organize within the groups because we've randomly allocated to them to groups. I had a project years ago, and what we wanted to do was to say in a traditional university, I went to an ancient university, I went to Aberdeen, and I could get up in the morning and walk into any class. I could walk into a medical school lecture or history lecture, whatever else. I couldn't do the exams, and I couldn't go to tutorials, but I could sit at the back and listen to that because it was open to all students. That's not available online. And I suggested we do that, and there was uproar. Oh my God, we couldn't possibly do that. We couldn't let people into my course even if they're not studying it. Why? Why? And that is because, essentially, I think it was the lack of confidence of the educators in what they were doing and the quality of what they're doing. It wasn't the fact that you couldn't do it technically. It was the culture, the mind space was not fitted for that. So I think social interaction, it's allowed me during the pandemic to engage with seminars and lectures and all over the world in places that I never even knew they were happening prior to the pandemic because they've had to move online. So if we design for it, we can create a thriving, healthy interaction environment where people can learn not just from our own colleagues and staff within the university, but from other colleagues all across the world. But we need to plan for it rather than just let it happen by chance.
Super. Okay. What about a digital hub perspective? Do people feel very cut off when they're working remotely, or are you the antidote? Perhaps,
I think we're the antidote. Actually, I think the criticism is valid during the pandemic. But it wasn't valid, it wouldn't be a valid criticism from before the pandemic. And to your point, the hubs actually is designed to foster that engagement and interaction. So I think we are the antidote to it and we are the solution to it. What we have down in Ludgate is we have 30 or 40 different types of companies represented there, from multinational to Indigenous Irish to micro to solopreneurs. They all have an opportunity to interact with each other, but also conduct their own business in a private setting when they need to, you know? So, yeah, we're the perfect solution.
I thought you might say that. Keith, do you want to add anything there in terms of, I don't know, how you've maybe seen students getting together during the pandemic, for example, and other ways of being co-present and some of the other language you used earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would agree with Frank that, in terms of kind of engagement further in higher education, we shouldn't be designing things that don't have a social dimension, a collaborative dimension. We just shouldn't be doing that. We know that the most effective learning, you can learn effectively individually, but when we're exposed to the views of our peers, we appreciate multiple perspectives, we broaden our cultural understanding, respect diversity more, and also when we're engaging and learning with others, we can take on more complex tasks than an individual could do on their own. So that's something that I think should always be in what we do. And as we move forward and into more kind of hybrid or blended ways of working and learning, which we should be doing, that should be up front and center. We need to design for that. I think the problem around the social dimensions that aren't related to formal study or formal work, is the spaces where they take place. So prior to the pandemic, students could congregate on the concourse, in the refectory, they could go to the student union, they were engaging maybe in student clubs and societies. That was somewhat lost when we made the move to fully online, partly because all the formal spaces that were provided to our students were provided by the institution and controlled by the institution. So students began to self-organize more, but I think one of the big challenges there is that not all students have the advantage of access to good technology at home. You know, the campus was a space where they accessed the resources they needed. So we need to think about equity in people having access to resources for formal studying and for those wider dimensions of the student experience or the working experience. And I think we need to think really carefully about, yeah, we can design for digitally enabled learning and teaching and working, whether that's on campus supported by technology or it's more blended or hybrid. But equally, we've got to think about those broader aspects of the working and the student experience and ask ourselves, where are digital spaces for that? How are we helping our students to move their clubs and societies online? So there's the digital dimension. And it's not just about digital for the sake of it. If we kind of are more flexible in the use of the digital space for the social elements that surround learning and teaching, then that becomes maybe a bit more equitable for that student that might be a bit too nervous to walk up to the film club for the first time. You know, they're just a bit more reticent. It gives another way in. They can be on the periphery and they can join in over time. It just, you know, it might open things up for that part-time student who has got family commitments and never gets to do anything social outside the classroom. So, you know, digital space to support social engagement around the formal learning activities or the formal working activities, we've really got to focus on that going forward, I think.
No, that's excellent. So it's not just about emulating the kind of interaction opportunities that we have in the in-person environment. It's a whole new set of affordances. It's a whole new way of having communities and having conversations.
A building like this is a formal space for learning and working. It's also a social space. A campus is a social space. They often come alive away from the formal studying. So we've got to think about that.
And if I could just add to that, we did offer study space for students during lockdown for the kids of West Cork who we thought wouldn't pay for accommodation in the city if the unis weren't opening. And in fact, nobody took it up. Very few offerings, except the overseas students who couldn't go over to Amsterdam or wherever. They chose to go up to the cities because they were finding that social setting with their, you know, housemates, flatmates, even if they were still going to college remotely from their bedroom, you know. So.
Yep, as I said, yeah, we need to think about how we do something different, not just replicate. I completely agree. A question here from a member of the parish, although she's in North Carolina, so hi Donna. What is the role of institutions in keeping doors open for people who will or could benefit from multiple modes of engagement? Flexibility like that does require more resources, and she'd be interested to hear what the others think about that. So, keeping doors open, and then the need for resources for that. I suppose that's the thing there. Like, as I said, that aspirations are great, but they need to be matched, I suppose. Frank?
Well, I think this is a bit of a loaded question, actually, because if I turn it on its head, look at this campus we're on just now. That has huge investment in resources, of buildings, of space that has to be kept open and heated and light and maintained. And we're seeing in the post-pandemic, during the pandemic, the drop off on that. We're now looking at how we repurpose our campuses because we realise we don't need the amount of space that we have got. Online education does require resources. I don't think it requires more resources. It requires different resources. It requires resources at an earlier stage to design the thing properly in the first place rather than to try and retrofit it. A lot of universities, I heard within Scotland, for example, within the UK, had to shift to online education during the pandemic and did it really badly because they did it arse over elbow. Did they say that? You know,
you just said it, Frank.
they tried to do things there on a shoestring, and they tried to do things in a hurry. And my friend said it's a bit like trying to teach people to swim after the flood has arrived. And so they didn't think about that in advance. So they thought about it afterwards. If you design for this in advance, then the resources are required in advance to design these things, but actually it's much more scalable. The very fact that we're having a question coming in from Carolina means that you can actually extend the boundaries of this campus globally as it goes through there. So it's about how you use these things and how you use these things in the longer term to scale up, to provide that. Not just to provide it at the time, but to provide asynchronous learning. So you can view this video tomorrow, next week, next month, and then you can then use that to augment your education, but have the opportunity to contact people. I frequently leave my email on these things and whatnot, and people will come back months and years later to say, by the way, what about this, or have you seen that? And so it's making these things not time dependent, but actually when people have to learn at that time. But I go back to the previous question, you have to think about these things in advance and design for that. When you let it happen just by chance, you have less control over what happens. You don't know what's going to happen because you're reacting all the time. You're not thinking in advance. One of the benefits of moving from face-to-face to online, pre-pandemic, was the fact that you had to rethink what you wanted to teach, what you wanted the students to learn, and then what technology you use for that purpose. So it's putting it on its head. And if you think about it that way, you almost always improve the quality of the education because it's designed to be student-led for where they are and to build them up stage by stage from very basic through to very advanced at their own pace, rather than to be just what I want to teach you and to say, we can't discuss X because that's next week's lesson. You'll have to come back next week. Well, that suits me, but it might not suit the learner who's got problems next week. So you have to think about that in the design process.
Keith?
Yeah, I agree with this question to an extent, and I agree that flexibility can require more resources, but I also think that we can achieve a lot by using resources more flexibly. So Frank mentioned, the notion of third space earlier, using our campuses as hubs within the community. And lots of universities will talk about their shiny new campus and how it will serve the wider community and be a space that they can use. But the doors largely close at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock every night. Why is that? Because we're all on 9-to-5 contracts. So if we had more flexible ways of working and more choice in how our staff might work, then actually keeping the doors open on the physical campus becomes much more of a kind of realistic possibility. And I think other possible ways forward to think about keeping the doors open, whether it's on the campus or kind of virtually. Why don't we have community membership for our universities and campuses in the same way that people have library cards? They can register, they can come in, they can use the resources. If we had more flexible infrastructure and more flexible patterns of working that maybe met the needs of our own staff to work flexibly, then doors open and greater access on campus online does become much more of a realistic possibility.
Grainne, what role do you think the hubs maybe can play in that
Well, I suppose
flexibility?
Yes, flexibility is crucial, and even if I look at our own example, where initially when we designed the building, we had a co-shared floor, and then the ground floor was our event space, which we then broke into corporate office space on the back of demand for corporate office space. That's now become fixed, right? It's hard-coded. It's not as flexible to roll that back. But unfortunately, we're finding ourselves in the scenario that we do need to roll it back. It needs to be multifunctional. It needs to sometimes be corporate space, sometimes community space, and sometimes event space. So yeah, we to your point, Frank, about design up front and having that flexibility embedded into it, I think is crucial.
Okay, we might take a question from the audience. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand. I think we've a roving mic going around. We do. Excellent. Stephen Cassidy.
Thanks very much. I'm really interested in the use of digital to be flexible and open and so on, but often that is at the modular level. It's how this particular module is being delivered. And yet, if you look at our programs, mostly in the UK and Ireland, they're quite closed in that there's a standard set of modules that all students, whether you're in Orkney taking your engineering or Fort William doing your engineering, you're all doing the same modules. And I suppose I was wondering, had you given much thought to the opportunity for a more personalised curriculum, that the Orkney engineering student could say, yes, I'll take some engineering, but I'm going to take other modules because I'm from Orkney and I see my job being in Orkney and so on, and a more customised, personalised curriculum and how digital could facilitate that. Thanks.
Okay, Keith, I think you're biting at the bit there, are you? Do you want to go ahead?
I agree entirely with the need for that. I think it's something that we are looking at and considering at UHI and trying to find more flexible ways kind of forward of how the curriculum's organised and conceptualised and people can engage with it. I think it's something we should all be thinking about though. And I think now more than ever, because coming out of the, I wouldn't say we're out of the pandemic, but as we kind of move beyond the stage we've been in, to a great extent. Many of our lecturers have got a greater range of kind of learning and teaching interventions and tools at disposal. Learners have got, quite rightly, increased expectations about flexibility and choice in how they engage. But there's a problem there at the modular level, and that's if individuals make their own decisions about how they'll engage their own students. And what we can't afford to happen going forward in a hybrid way of engaging your students, or high flex, or whatever we want to call it, and I think we really need to carefully define what those things mean. There's multiple definitions for all of those terms at the moment, but what we don't want to risk is that increased flexibility disrupting the student experience, so that Module A requires students to undertake an online lecture. You can do it from home at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and Module B has a 10 o'clock practical workshop where they've got to be on campus. So we've got to think at a program level, we've got to think more coherently, and we've got to think more flexibly about the curriculum and how it's engaged with. And I think there's lots of ways it can be done. I think we need to take stock of what we've experienced over the last couple of years, because I think that gives us an opportunity to identify a wider range of ways, in which we think about the curriculum and what it looks like and how it's facilitated and even where it's located.
Oh, that's very good. That ties in with a few things you've said already. Frank, I think about the need to design these things in, not just kind of try and add the flexibility in afterwards.
Yeah. So there are two polarized ways to look at this. When I began this nearly 30 years ago, I was telling at lunch, we had, I got an inquiry, when the first degree of the UHI went through, we got challenged because normally you say you require, 4 hires, 2 A's, 2 B's to get access to this course. You can't have what you've written down for this course. And I'd written down, to do this course, first year university, you have to be 16 years old at least and alive. And they said, we can't have that. So I said, well, where does it say in the regulations you can't say that? And so we had to actually, and so this is a multidisciplinary course. And we built into that electives at each level, which means that you can take wildcards. And we're thinking about, you can take Gaelic. If you're going to work in a Gaelic speaking environment and you want to have that as part of your course, you can do that. So if you're going to work in nursing, but you want to have Gaelic, or as an engineer, but you want to have Gaelic. Nowadays, increasingly, we're having things like climate awareness, climate change awareness, and zero carbon energy within the budget. So people are aware of these things as a bog standard, as a basic requirement. These things. However, the other side of the coin is, what is education for? Is education there to stimulate you and encourage you and to make you think in the wider world, the wider universe, or is it there for a particular purpose? So if it's there for a particular purpose, for example, then you need to understand level 3 biology covers things that they expect you to know at level 1. And if you haven't done level 1, you're screwed. You don't know what a species is. You don't know what genera means. You haven't covered the basics on that. And so you'll end up, if you have this pick and mix modular, it's totally flexible, it's wonderful, it's very stimulating. It's like if you go to Open University, you can start at 3rd year and work back to 1st year and work around the clock and do all the different things. That's great, because you're doing there for personal satisfaction and broadening your awareness of the world. If you want to actually build up a systematic course as a scientist, then you don't want your doctor to be attending you in a car crash and saying, oops, I didn't do Anatomy 101, I only did 103. Yeah, too late for that. You need to know systematically. So you need to think how these things are built up and allow people to opt in and opt out. But there are paths of guidance through some of these things that allow you to be very creative and multidisciplinary. We're looking at now bringing in merging 3 colleges, and we're thinking about how we actually blend in the different educational research elements to think about these things in ways that we hadn't thought about before. So one of my passions is, for example, is the communication of science in ordinary level speech. So communicating science to non-scientists. How do we do that in terms of, we're looking at complex problems of ecology or sustainability within biodiversity and so on and so forth. And there's so much nonsense wrapped up in tabloid speak that words like sustainability have lost their currency, because you have people who claim to be manufacturing soap powder in a sustainable way. What? You think about these things in a very broad sense. So you have to build up the building blocks of that knowledge in ways that are sensible. And if they're totally flexible, it gives you complete carte blanche to study what you want, but you might end up with such an eclectic knowledge that you have no specialist skills in anything, and you're building yourself to be unemployable, for example. So there are two polar extremes, and I think you have to look at these things in different ways for different situations.
Okay, very good. Do you want to say anything, Grainne, about increasing learner choice? Okay, no problem. Tom, do you want to go over?
Yeah. There's been hundreds of questions come in on Twitter for Grainne. Was he a messer in school? Ken McCarthy, we were chatting there, and if you want to, the fella who looks a bit like me but not as good looking down the back.
Better looking younger brother.
We'll agree to disagree.
Far better looking younger brother, I think is what you meant to say, Gearoid. Yeah, no, I'm really interested there. Frank just mentioned about colleges merging in Scotland, and obviously the University of Highlands and Islands being so distributed is of great interest to me, particularly in the context of the technological higher education sector here in Ireland is going through a massive transformation over these last couple of years. This college is now MTU. When I was a student here, it was Cork RTC, so it's changed twice since then. And the college I work in myself has just merged this last month with our colleagues in Carlow. So I'm just wondering what part digital can play maybe in that. And I suppose I'm kind of mindful of Paulo Freire and Miles Horton in the book, we make the road by walking. Maybe we have to be the leaders in this space and be the example that we want people to be in using the digital tools to transform their lives and education.
Miles Horton was a friend of mine. It's taken me back 30 odd years when he educated me. When a snake ambushed me on the campus outside the library where he was, and he said, "Are their eyes like that or like that?" I said, "Who gives a shit? It's a snake." I know the ones like that are poisonous. And the ones, Anyway, you have to think about that in a broad context. I think from the merger point of view we have, then the digital aspect is the less challenging aspect. We have adapted, and Keith's now, he can tell you more about the learning and teaching plan, enhancement strategy for the university. Our colleges have adopted that lock, stock and barrel. So in the merger, we don't have to argue about learning and teaching because we've all adapted the same thing. We all use the same email, we all use the same online learning environment, and so on and so forth. What is different is the culture, the baggage, the bit between the ears of different people. Oh, we don't work with them. Oh God, they're from Kerry. We don't work with them. We only work with people from up the road, the other direction. And that's about how you bring these things together in terms of what the purpose is. And I think the education, the whole philosophy of Horton and Farrelly for a large extent was, Horton set up the thing called Highlander Centre, or the Highlander as they call it, and I was there for many months, and that was a school for problems. And what they did was they didn't give lectures, they didn't have sessions like this. It was in a circle, and you dealt with people. People were raised a particular problem, and then someone who'd attacked that and solved that problem then shared what they did, and they learned from each other. So it was like a generic way of adult education, which was very participatory, and it was almost like the tubers that grow in and grow up in different places. It was spreading education by that network process. We have to think about these things when we're merging because the technological systems are the easiest bits. And in the book we talked about earlier on, the digital learning book, we actually say that that the way to start on doing this is not to start with the technology. The way to start was, what do you want to teach? What do you want people to learn? And I think, Gerard, you were saying that earlier on, the way not to do it is to say, or was it you, Tom, at lunch, that you cannot transfer what you do face to face, lock, stock and barrel, into the digital format. You just cannot do that because it's a different dynamic. It doesn't mean to say you can't do the same result. You'll use different techniques and different ways of doing that. And in some ways you might do it better, but you'll have to just adapt yourself to those things being asynchronous, at a distance, non-tactile, and so on and so forth, that you can actually use different techniques to go and do these things. And bringing people together, what you need to do is establish what the common ideas are and the common goals are. And that's a cultural problem. That's not a technological problem.
Universities, what role do you think hubs can play?
Well, if we just go back to the merging of corporate cultures or more university cultures, my prior life before COVID was in the multinational space where corporate mergers happened all the time. And to your point, I'm not talking to him, he's from Kerry, or they're of that ilk, I'm definitely not going there. It takes a number of years for that to be embedded. It takes a lot of collaboration and it takes a lot of respect, I think, for everybody involved. The technology platform is a very defined piece of integration work that needs to be done, and if you have multiple teams collaborating on that, maybe that tends to bring people together to unify, but not ignoring the different cultures, I think, is important too, and addressing it head on, you know, offering the opportunities for those cultures to be respected, because they may never be merged. It may be important to keep the uniqueness to some degree, right? That's what makes us all special, I suppose, you know. So
I tell my daughter that even I don't believe everything I say. You know, so you have to have people that challenge your opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Keith?
I think the only additional point I would make in relation to mergers and kind of bringing colleges together might be around the opportunities to enrich overall experience around learning and teaching. You know, the kind of sharing of professional practice, learning from each other's specialisms, but also I think, and it kind of relates to modularization a little bit and how we design programs, bringing together programs and cohorts of students who are studying disciplines that might be dealt with completely separately because they're in different colleges, but which in the real world are actually really closely integrated and work well together, and closely together. So I think there's the possibility to really enhance and make the student experience more coherent and more reflective of the real world if we look at opportunities like mergers to bring disciplines together and related areas of scholarship and research together.
Very good. Roisin, I think we're going to take a question from the ether. Do you want to read her out there, girl?
Yeah, sure. Okay. It is often difficult to reach some groups. What do you do to reach hard-to-reach groups to help make engagement in learning more accessible? So, I mean, this ties in with something we were talking about at lunchtime as well, I suppose, that digital learning isn't about the technology. It's an egalitarian tradition that is meant to be about breaking down barriers to learning, be they, you know, personal or, as we saw during COVID, geographical, cultural, or what have you. But there are particular groups, I suppose, that we can think of that are particularly hard to reach. What are the strategies we can adopt in higher education or in digital hubs in terms of providing that access? Does anyone want to take that?
Yeah, so it's a concise question, but it's one that's got broad-ranging implications. And I think there's certainly possibilities thinking on a kind of broader level around how do we kind of bridge the gap between informal and formal learning. You know, so how might we use open education approaches, whether that's open education in the community or online, to bring more people in to experience education, and that may or may not lead into something more formal for them. But I think we also know that in relation to what you were just saying about, you know, kind of digital and making things more kind of equal and you know, equitable, and the use of digital as space rather than as, you know, channels for kind of delivery per se. There's things we know from the research that are quite well established. So, for example, something as simple as a discussion board within the virtual learning environment or the managed learning environment, as Frank prefers, we know that that gives an increased opportunity for students to engage in the 1 hour face-to-face discussion. And we know from the research that direct entrants may be coming into second or third year for degree who may be a little bit more reticent. And we're not talking, you know, we're not characterizing whole groups of learners here, but there is evidence that would say that those learners that are coming in as direct entrants to join an existing cohort may be at least initially more quiet in class, but an online discussion board that's structured and has a proper activity isn't just there, you know, isn't just build it and they will come. It can provide an opportunity for them to think about more about what they want to say, articulate their views, and communicate those views in ways that they may not, at least initially, be prepared to do in a face-to-face situation. Similarly, there's lots of research that looks at that's looked at learners who are studying in, let's say, English as a second language, who will find the increased space that the digital can provide alongside whatever's happening in the face-to-face classroom much more opportune in terms of how they can engage and express their views. So I mean, there's so many different levels to this question. You can think about it kind of grand scale, or you can think about it in terms of those little interventions that we, as educators, can do just to make what we're offering a bit more accessible for the groups of learners that we support.
From my perspective, I think it's understanding what are the root causes to the hard-to-reach groups, and then tailoring a solution, because it's not going to be one reason that's causing the hard-to-reach groups. It's a long tail of reasons, and whether it's gender, whether it's joining a course late, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's hardware connectivity isolation that's causing it. It could be infrastructural, it could be cultural, it could be so many reasons. And to your point, it's a brilliant question, but it's a Pandora's box, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would say, some of the issues you raised around your modularization and curriculum, and how can we make the curriculum more accessible and more flexible for learners, whatever their needs might be. I think that's key to this as well. I think that the idea of like the modularized curriculum that might be available online, but is really kind of biased towards full-time students and those that attend the campus. I think we've got to move away from that. And even notions of part-time study. In many universities, part-time study will mean undertaking 120 credit module a semester. That's notionally 12 to 14 hours a week. That's not part-time study. So we've got to be much more flexible in the ways that you were alluding to actually achieve some of this.
I think it is. I mean, to reiterate that, it's not a blueprint for all these things. You have to think, why is the group hard to reach in the first place? And that's the root to your problem. I mean, looking back over the 30 years of the Sustainable Rural Development Programme, a high proportion, I would say maybe 80%, I'm just anecdotally here, I haven't got the figures to hand, would be women. And that was quite often because they were coming back to education after having a family or restarting work and whatnot, and they couldn't attend 9 o'clock lectures on a Tuesday morning or whatever else that's through there. And when we moved to, in 1993, 94, to put the thing online, we've been teaching online since then in various ways. The first noticeable result was that people stopped attending lectures and classes. They began to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And some of my colleagues gave the traditional response, "Oh my God, they stopped coming to classes. This is ridiculous. This is crazy." And my response was the exact opposite. Well, why would they bother coming? Because they can get this online. They don't have to drive an hour each way for a 1 hour class, spend 2 hours a day driving just for a 1 hour class. Let's look at that more constructively and put more online so they don't have to do even that. And then what we can do is timetable the face-to-face contact we had in terms of problem solving. It's what we now call the flipped classroom. Yeah? So we were 25 years ahead of the time. We actually said, just give them the stuff and then find out what the problems are, and then we can discuss these things in more detail. And your question will be different from your question and different from your question, etc., as it goes through there. So you can customize the learning to that particular group. So if there were people that could not attend for various reasons, we say, well, what suits you? What can you attend? And we began to have various solutions, drop-in classes, drop-in online classes, things that were recorded and digitized, sent out, people who had bad bandwidth. In the days when we used to be able to put things on a USB stick, we put the whole course on a USB stick and sent it out in the post to them, and they can plug it in, and they got all the stuff they would get on the online version without being online. And they only had to go online to do email or SMS, which is easy because that's a very, very low bandwidth. And so that was customized for them as it goes through. So there are different solutions for different places, but you have to start off with the root of the problem in the first place rather than try to say, this works for everybody.
I might try one last question, so I suppose. Do you want to do that, Tom?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, we just threw that at you, Rosie. Sorry, yeah. Okay. Oh, actually, this looks like from Laurie Phipps in Birmingham. Try and get them both in, perhaps. Oh yes, certainly. During the pandemic, students told us that they wanted to be back on campus, not for lectures, but because of the reasons including broadband, quiet space, and issues around poverty, etc. Should we design universities as social spaces?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a fairly...
No question.
No question. Does anybody actually...
There was a question there from Aileen.
Tom, there's a question.
Oh, from Aileen. I've only one eye, you know that. So if you'd sat here, I would have seen you. So
It's your fault.
your fault. Sorry, Aileen. Thank you.
I suppose this is kind of a provocative question, really, and I'm using today's event as an exemplar because it's available online as a hybrid event and it's available on campus. So why attend?
Boom.
So absolutely. I thoroughly agree to that. I wasn't kidding when I said I've literally been in 16, 17 countries this year without leaving my desk. The only reason I came here was because I promised Tom that I would come several years ago. And we go through that process. I've been much more critical now as to where to go. I mean, I've spent my whole career going all over the planet. And when I look back on the carbon footprint I have got, then it's shameful. Fly to Uppsala and give a talk, or Copenhagen, and when you spend a 1 hour talk and you mix and you go for dinner that night, and you come back the next day, and it takes me 3 days to do the 1 hour talk. There's no reason to do that anymore. I wouldn't think. What we're looking at these things, we have to build value. Several years ago, I went to Gothenburg to do a talk. I did my presentation online. I sent it to them. Everyone who signed up for the event like today looked at that in advance. I turned up, we did a master class essentially on the particular topics. We then did a breakout class for particular problems, particular issues. I followed up the next day with a session with them to go and do various sort of problem-solving issues that were involved in, as the participants being students, as it were, within that sort of stuff. There, a peer learning session. Then I came back, and at home I was able to answer any questions that follow up through online questions and whatnot. And Tom and I are doing a thing in July, I think, on a similar format to that. So I think we do have to go. I mean, it's lovely to come to a place like this, but quite frankly, I've been all over the place, and you could be sitting in a hotel anywhere in the world doing that sort of stuff. There's no need to do that sort of stuff now. And I think the added value for these things, for getting, it's about how we engineer the quality experience. We can do polls online, you can do follow-up online, you can do breakout sessions and whatnot. All my PhD students, we pick up on Teams, even if they're on the island, the same island as me, we pick up and do the things face-to-face because they can contact me when they have the problem, not when we have a scheduled session to meet. So I hope we do not go back to the way we did things in the past and organising these things as a bog standard. I think we need to think outside the box and throw the key away. And organise things that are much more flexible and much more collaborative. I hope to be continuing. I plan to retire in 2 weeks' time, and I've told all my colleagues and whatnot that I'm going to come back and haunt them. I've deliberately said that I will not come back and do supply teaching and join the board and all that sort of stuff as previous colleagues do, but I might come back and be a student. And the overwhelming response was, oh shit, no. I hope they don't choose my course. But I really mean that, because I think you can go back and do things. You can, as you were saying, customize your learning for various things. You can pick up modules here, and you can pick up things that are more relevant to you in different aspects is there. If I went back to square one and did what I did again, I wouldn't necessarily pick the same educational path that I have picked, although I've thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it.
Grainne, why would students come in?
Well, I have to admit that I find all of this chat today really inspirational for third level. What worries me is second level, and if I look at what's happening down in West Cork, the subjects that are available to the kids in West Cork are very narrow and confined. And if we take just computer science as an example, which I have a bee in my bonnet about at the moment, there is no child south of the city of Cork in a position to pursue computer science as a leaving cert subject because it's not taught in the school. Except Clonakilty, let me just put that caveat in. That's not a unique problem to County Cork, that's a unique problem to rural Ireland. It's not a subject covered because of supply and demand within the school itself. If it was solved for in a shared service model where resources were pooled together and offered online, a creative solution, so it's fantastic to see that you guys are solving for it in third level, but I actually think it now needs to extend further into secondary level.
We're also doing that at secondary school level.
Yeah, no, good point.
Yeah.
Keith?
Yeah, I think why attend? I'm going to go back to Laurie's question about social spaces. And apologies, Laurie, I don't think we meant to treat your question flippantly. It's just I think we agreed with it, with the statement and the sentiment. But we're social people. People are social. I think it's important that we do more things in a kind of online way and make things more accessible. But things like this are also important. You don't get the same quiet conversations on a corner online as you do an event like this. You don't always have the opportunity for a learner to take to one side and say, actually, I'm struggling with this. You know, and there's ways to do that online, but they don't happen as naturally as they sometimes do when you're in person and together in a space. I came down to this event today on a 2.5-hour train journey. You know, as a result of that, I know the names of lots of towns I didn't know about before. You know, I saw lots of sites I wouldn't have seen. I came from an event at Dublin City University yesterday where I learned an incredible amount by being in a physical space for learning and teaching that had been designed really well. I had a conversation with a friend, the guy outside, at the break. Turns out we knew someone in mutual. We had that conversation because we're standing next to each other in the coffee queue. You know, so there's nuances to be in together that you don't get when you're online. And I think we need to balance both. And I think we need to recognize that there are times when being with people is actually really important.
My daughter says that I'm really good at social distancing because I've been practicing for years. But I think people learn differently, and that's the key. You have to think about what people need to follow that through. I'm quite happy to do that at a distance, and other people need that proximity of co-location. So there's different things for different people.
Yeah, as Gearoid and Frank and Keith know, I have a social space called Tom's Tavern on Zoom, so it's where we do a lot of learning. I'm just watching the time, so I'm going to just hand back to Gearoid, but just personally on behalf of myself, I just want to thank everybody who's behind the scenes here today, everybody online, yourself sitting here, and of course the speakers. So I just want to say that on behalf of myself. We have one more question.
It's not really a question, it's just more that, yes, of course it's fantastic that digital growth is happening, but we cannot, under any other circumstance, forget the one-to-one in class. That has to be kept. I worked for a while in the counselling service here, and the number of students, absolutely, we were 72% up on students looking for our service because they couldn't cope with online. So yes, we have to work online, and it's fantastic, and of course the pandemic, we were thrown into it very unexpectedly, but we really, and you're right, we do have to design it, but we cannot forget the students and the on-campus experience. It is just essential to all of us, because as you said, we're social people, we can't give that up. So if we are designing, that has to be frontmost for everybody in any design, that the on-campus, I mean even here today, it's much better for my mind to be here in person rather than sitting at home. It's much more interactive. So that's just my side of it, that I do think we have to keep that frontmost and central.
No, I think that's a good point. But it is interesting that 25 people decided to attend in person, and something like 120 people decided to attend online. That's kind of to Eileen's point. But we've been trying to socialise an idea, kind of an approach that we're calling digital by design. That's not our invention, but the notion is, let's apply digital, let's roll out digital where it brings clear benefits and clear value, but maybe we should think about in person the same way. Anyway, we really need to finish. I see people packing their bags and everything else. So I just want to thank everybody who is here in the room, but I also want to thank all the people who are here online. I especially want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank everybody behind the scenes in the TEL department who did so much to make this a success, in particular Shane and Brendan there. Also Colm, who came in for the day. Thanks a million, Colm, for all your work behind the camera and with the audio. Roisin, Christina, Tig, Niall, Christelle, I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Lauren, excuse me, Lauren, who's online and has been watching all that's going on in Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube. Anybody else? No, great, okay. I'll quit while I'm ahead. Thanks a million, everyone. See you online or see you face to face. See you, I hope. Bye-bye.